Look, we've all watched a movie adaptation and thought, wow, that really missed the entire point of the original. But imagine you wrote the original. Imagine you wrote the book and the studio turns it into a song and dance childish nightmare about penguins. Or they cast Christian Bale as a character meant to be a satirical void of capitalist horror, and the internet turns him into a Dubai guy and Jim Dude meme. Today, we're diving into 5 authors who watched Hollywood take their carefully crafted stories and then light them on fire, one musical number and leather trench coat at a time. First, I want to kick things off with a quick mental exercise. Imagine, if you will, you've written a deeply personal novel, something intended as a sharp, provocative exploration of free will, violence, morality, and human nature itself. It's intense, it's challenging, it's borderline inaccessible. But hey, your Anthony Burgess and subtlety and simplicity have never exactly been your strong suit anyway. But anyway, you have poured your heart and soul into this. You've structured it around a made-up slang, just complicated enough to scare away the casuals. And you've thought to yourself, I have left nothing open to interpretation here. Surely no one is going to misunderstand this, right? Then, at that precise moment, Stanley Kubrick busts through your fucking living room wall and punches your idea in the face. Anthony Burgess is what you'd politely call an eccentric literary genius, or would impolitely call an absolute fucking nightmare of pretension, depending on your mood that day. But there's no denying that A Clockwork Orange is one of those once-in-a-generation novels that genuinely feels like it matters. It's disturbing, compelling, and yes, pretty pretentious. But it also has something powerful to say. Specifically, it asks whether it's better to have a bad man choose to be good or to force him to behave through conditioning. Classic moral quandary. Perfect for philosophical debates at dinner parties that I don't get invited to. Then, in 1971, Stanley Kubrick unleashed his film version of A Clockwork Orange onto an unsuspecting public. And Burgess watched in absolute horror as his nuanced critique of societal violence was immediately overshadowed by people praising it for being so stylishly violent. Burgess sitting there clutching his metaphorical sofa like he's in Get Out. He found himself witnessing what every author secretly dreads. His baby transformed into an icon for edgy teenagers everywhere. Posters plastering the dorm room walls alongside like Che Guevara and Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon. You see, Burgess's biggest issue with Kubrick's film wasn't just the usual complaints authors have about adaptations. No, Burgess was concerned with something far more existential. The complete misunderstanding of his moral message. Imagine writing a cautionary tale about how terrible something is, and then people read it, nod thoughtfully, and immediately go and do that terrible thing that you were trying to tell them not to do. It's like those caution labels that they put on shampoo bottles for simpletons, but instead of reading "do not drink," the label reads "do not use this as a guide to life," and yet somehow Kubrick inspired legions of budding psychopaths, or at the very least edgy teenagers who thought psychopaths were misunderstood and kinda cool, to emulate Alex DeLarge's casual cruelty and impeccable eyeliner. Here's the twist though. Kubrick didn't exactly misunderstand the novel. He didn't misinterpret it. He was just Kubricking it up. Do you know what I mean? Stanley Kubrick was famous, or infamous, for his almost clinical detachment from humanity. His films weren't known for warmth or subtlety, they were ice-cold dissections, precise, sterile, and often wildly misinterpreted by audiences who are just desperate to see the meaning of life in the opening credits of The Shining, when Kubrick himself would probably wince and roll his eyes at these interpretations. Anyway, Burgess wasn't buying any of it. He wanted clarity for this message. Kubrick gave him ambiguity. Burgess saw moral absolutes. Kubrick saw a philosophical playground. The novelist saw the protagonist, or the antagonist, the main character of the story, Alex DeLarge. He saw him as a monster, a necessary evil to explore deeper, darker questions. Kubrick, he saw him as a charismatic and oddly sympathetic, although that's partly thanks to Malcolm McDowell's performance. He is really unnervingly charming. Anyway, Burgess famously described Kubrick's interpretation as a glorification of violence, completely ignoring the book's moral core, which was that without free will, goodness doesn't really mean anything. To Burgess, Alex was a horror. To Kubrick, he was fascinating. To audiences, he was inexplicably kinda cool and badass, do you know what I mean? But anyway, Burgess would later sarcastically lament that he was destined to be remembered primarily as the guy who inspired the movie. That's awful. Rather than as a literary heavyweight in his own right. It probably didn't help that he wrote the entire novel in a fevered rush. He was convinced that he was dying from a brain tumour. Spoiler alert, he wasn't dying. And the fact that he didn't die just made his disdain for the adaptation all the more profound, because he had to live with it for decades after. Imagine thinking, well, I mean, I'm dying anyway, so who gives a shit? Only to then live on and watch precisely what you didn't want to see unfold, helplessly screaming into the void, watching it take place like you're in a fucking Charles Dickens novel. What's extra tragic or hilarious, depending on if you fall more towards my side of the empathy spectrum. But Burgess spent decades attempting to set the record straight on A Clockwork Orange. He wrote essays, he gave lectures, he even penned a musical version of the novel to reclaim the narrative. Yeah, a musical version, yep. In a famous interview, Burgess moaned, "The book I'm best known for is a novel that I'm prepared to repudiate." I mean, imagine creating one of the most famous pieces of literature of the 20th century, only to wish desperately that it wasn't the biggest piece of literature of the 20th century. It's awful. It's like Beethoven hating the Fifth Symphony. It's like Shakespeare regretting writing Hamlet, or Tolkien wishing he'd never come up with a Hobbit. It's madness. Anyway, Kubrick's version, it became iconic. Burgess's original intent got trampled under the cinematic boots of the movie. The author himself became permanently salty about it. It's like Burgess inadvertently participated in an internal game of telephone where this clear, moralistic message just kept being distorted and distorted and distorted until it was this edgy, visually stunning, to be fair, game of nihilistic cosplay. He ended up forever being known as the creator of something he despised. A bit like Frankenstein, to be fair, like Frankenstein. In the end, Burgess's hatred of Kubrick's A Clockwork Orange became nearly as legendary as the film itself. A perfect example of the eternal struggle between authorial intent and audience interpretation, between art and entertainment, between a very pissed off author and a filmmaker who frankly couldn't give a shit about what subtext you were going for. But hey ho, Burgess can take solace in one thing: no matter how misunderstood his work was, at least it's remembered what we are talking about it. There's a bitter irony that Burgess himself would probably appreciate, that by despising the movie version so openly and so passionately, he inadvertently ensured his own immortality. The film's notoriety made the novel immortal, like it or not, even if it wasn't remembered for the reasons he had hoped. And isn't that the dream of every misunderstood, cranky, genius arsehole author? To be eternally relevant, perpetually annoyed, and permanently misinterpreted. Well, yeah, maybe not, but it's good content. Next, I'm going to do The Shining. No, I'm joking, I'm not doing this. Did you hear Stephen King didn't like The Shining? Apparently, I'm not going to do that. Everybody knows Stephen King hated The Shining. He even made his own version of The Shining. Let's just skip over that like a hurdle. Next, we're doing Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, or Charlie and the Chocolate. Roald Dahl, right, is a man whose name conjures whimsy. It conjures slightly twisted images of childhood nostalgia, chocolate rivers, and adults tormenting children, primarily. Roald Dahl, he had an enemy. Well, I mean, he considered many people to be his enemy, to be fair. Certain groups of people he considered to be his enemy, but that's not why we're here, that's not why I'm talking about him. His true lifelong enemy turned out to be a certain 1971 film called Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. First, let's briefly remind ourselves just who the fuck Roald Dahl was. Roald Dahl was basically the Tim Burton of literature before Tim Burton was Tim Burton. He was darkly comic, he was morbidly fascinating, and he was consistently towing the line between whimsy and like nightmare fuel. Do you know what I mean? Just tiptoeing around. Roald Dahl's books are what happens when a grown-up never forgets what it's like to be a slightly terrified, traumatized child. And when you consider that he once served as a fighter pilot in World War II, it's understandable why his stories tend to flirt casually with danger, darkness, and just the absurdity of human existence and childhood. You know, typical kid stuff. Anyway, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory was the adaptation of Dahl's beloved 1964 book Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. A little hint as to one of the reasons he had an issue with it right there. Anyway, Dahl himself, he adapted the screenplay, so you would assume he'd be happy with the final product, right?
Right? Wrong.
In fact, Dahl loathed the film with the fiery intensity that he usually reserved for the No, I'm not going to talk about it. It's not the time or place. But why? Why exactly did Roald Dahl despise this particular adaptation so passionately? First off, let's get one thing clear. Dahl, he did not merely dislike this film, he was morally offended by its existence. It wasn't just the usual quaint grievances like, they cut his hair, or they made the chocolate river the wrong shade of brown. No. Roald Dahl's distaste was a deep existential and enduring hatred. He felt betrayed. He felt betrayed. Like the fat German kid's mum. He was so betrayed. Like, at the heart of Dahl's distaste was the film's shift in focus from Charlie. Charlie is the impoverished, sweet-natured protagonist of the story, and instead the movie kind of focuses on Willy Wonka himself, who is famously and brilliantly portrayed by Gene Wilder. Dahl did not enjoy it. He felt deeply that Wilder's Willy... that Wilder's Willy, he completely stole Charlie's thunder, did Wilder's Willy. To Dahl, Charlie was what represented the heart of the story. He was an earnest young kid whose kindness and decency ultimately wins him the day. But Wilder's Wonka, but Gene Wilder's Willy Wonka was, I mean, just look at him. He's charismatic, he's eccentric, he's utterly mesmerising in every scene he's in. You can't take your eyes off him. Audiences rightly loved him, but Dahl fucking did not love him. Imagine writing a heartfelt story about a sweet, impoverished little boy finally getting his big break, only for the film adaptation to effectively turn that little boy into a side character, a side story. Do you know what I mean? And he was so outraged by Gene Wilder's presence in the film that he accused the filmmakers of hijacking the narrative and rewriting it as Willy Wonka the Musical Extravaganza, starring a bunch of random brats and some kid called Charlie. I mean, I might have embellished what he said, but that fits the spirit of what he was getting at perfectly. And in the music, he fucking hated that music. Like, he hated the music with the passion he typically reserved for the Jute. Stop it, Jim, stop it. He despised the music so much that reportedly at the premiere he was like vibrating with irritation. It was reported, like, every time someone started singing and dancing around. In Roald Dahl's eyes, the film had transformed his dark cautionary tale into this sunny, Disney-esque musical that completely missed the point. We'll get to another one of them, by the way. Imagine if someone took your carefully constructed, slightly sinister moral parable and then injected cheerful tunes about candy and the power of imagination. It's like if you threw a little bit of tap dancing into Silence of the Lambs. Fun? Yes. Completely inappropriate? Absolutely. But do you know what I mean? Dahl also had some serious issues with the film's ending, which deviated significantly from the books, the original version. In the book, the villainous children face consequences that, yeah, they're humorous and karmic, but they border on sadistic. They definitely do. Dahl wanted the bratty, spoiled, greedy children to learn harsh, unforgettable 1960s lessons. But in the film, those fates were softened. Their punishments were just sort of hinted at. I mean, they're there, but they're not fully explored. Essentially, Dahl's moral lessons, which were behave badly and suffer deeply amusing but karmically fitting consequences that will ruin the rest of your life. That was watered down to behave badly and you'll get mild inconvenience for a little while and then a stern talking to. Unsatisfying, to be sure. Dahl was further enraged because the studio just blatantly ignored his input after a certain point. He was initially brought on to write the screenplay himself, but he soon found himself relegated to a sort of a bitter spectator. He was forced to watch helplessly as his story was twisted and reshaped without his approval. According to his widow, Felicity, he felt profoundly betrayed, and he swore never to allow Hollywood near any of his characters again. Yeah, that worked out well. For context, Dahl's relationship with Hollywood was so sour that he refused multiple offers for sequels, spin-offs, adaptations for the rest of his life. Hollywood basically ghosted him after the premiere of Willy Wonka, and so he happily returned the favour by never picking up the phone to them again. And to make matters worse, his bitterness over the adaptation, it didn't fade with time, it just fermented. For years after the film's release, Dahl publicly vented his anger whenever the topic came up, regularly describing the adaptation as crummy and accusing Hollywood of ruining his work. In one interview, he states pretty bluntly that he had zero interest in the film and he found it to be a complete betrayal of his original vision. Sources confirm that he referred to the adaptation as one of his greatest regrets. Imagine The man crashed his plane in Libya during World War II. Did you know what I mean? He nearly died, and then he lived on to write stories about children being terrorised by witches, but he was more angry about Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. Mental. To his eternal chagrin, the film became a beloved classic. That is another through line for all of these, that they all become beloved classics. They eclipse the novels in pop culture, all of these examples. For generations of viewers, Gene Wilder's Willy Wonka, Gene Wilder's Willy, he remains iconic. Kids who grew up watching it still nostalgically hum Pure Imagination, oblivious to the fact that Roald Dahl is spinning in his grave. It's exactly the kind of ironic, darkly humorous twist that he might have written himself if he weren't, dead. Ultimately, Dahl's disdain for Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory wasn't merely creative. It was deeply personal. It was a profound sense of betrayal from an author who believed his work had been gutted and sanitised for mainstream appeal. It's a bitter, bitter irony worthy of Dahl himself that his deeply dark, mischievously twisted storytelling was distilled into something he considered toothless and saccharine. But hey ho, at least he got the last laugh, sort of. I mean, the Dahl estate withheld adaptations for years and years after his death. They forced Hollywood to wait until his widow finally relented, and then Tim Burton would step in. Anyway, we're done with that. Let's move on to the meat of this video. The granddaddy of them all. Alan Moore. Alan Moore is not just an author who dislikes film adaptations of his work. He is the literary equivalent of a warlock who has placed an eternal hex on Hollywood. He does not merely critique adaptations of his films, he disowns them. He denounces them, he disavows them, and depending on the moon cycle, he probably performs some sort of binding ritual to ensure that anyone involved in the making of them never finds peace in this life or the next. But anyway, if you're unfamiliar with Moore's general vibe, imagine like a bearded Victorian ghost. Anyway, we'll begin with Watchmen. When Moore wrote Watchmen in 1986, it wasn't just a comic, it was a scalpel, slicing open the superhero genre. It was dark, philosophical, political, and aggressively meta. The comic deconstructed everything from American exceptionalism to the idea of masked vigilantes being noble, or even of sound mind. It was a thesis disguised as a comic book. Then Zack Snyder got his muscly hands on it and said, how cool are those costumes? How sweet would it be watching those costumes fight in slow motion? And to be fair, Zack Snyder's Watchmen is one of the more faithful adaptations of Moore's work, at least in terms of the visuals and the aesthetic. It recreates many of Dave Gibbons' iconic panels with religious fervour. But that's the problem. Snyder, as always, as I have said before, is all style, no substance. He turned Moore's morally ambiguous, politically charged story into a flashy, R-rated action movie. Moore wasn't amused by this. He was done caring by the time Watchmen came out, you must understand. We'll work our way back. By the time the Watchmen movie came out, he was already well over these adaptations of his movies, of which there had been many. He said about Watchmen, and I quote, "I don't want anything to do with it." He also stated that he hadn't watched it. He doesn't watch these films, he won't see them. He had no intention of watching it. When he was asked how he felt about adaptations of his work in general, he actually responded with, "I spit venom on it." I'm going to be doing a lot of bad Alan Moore impressions during this bit, by the way. But Moore's problem isn't just with Watchmen. His vendetta, shall we say, runs deep, my friends. We'll talk about V for Vendetta now. Let's just do it, because this is a fan favourite. The Guy Fawkes mask has become a symbol of resistance, a fashion statement, and the official uniform of the hacktivist hacktivist collective. Hacktivist... Oh, Jesus fucking Christ. Anonymous use it. It's anonymous. None of this sits well with Alan Moore, you understand. V for Vendetta, the comic book I'm talking about, was a gritty, uncompromising tale about anarchism versus fascism. The Wachowski people, the Wachowskis, their film version took the sharp, their film version took the sharp, dangerous edge of Moore's story and sanded it down into a sleek anti-Bush allegory with Natalie Portman and some very, very good mood lighting. I like V for Vendetta, but the movie promotes democracy as the ideal alternative to totalitarianism. Not in Alan Moore's world. In Alan Moore's world, V was not fighting for democracy, he was fighting for anarchy. He's an anarchist. And that distinction, I have to go with Alan Moore. That distinction matters. In interviews, Moore has ripped the movie to shreds. He said that it simplified his narrative. He hasn't seen it, you understand. But he said that it simplified the narrative, it misunderstood the characters, and ultimately betrayed the spirit of the book. He even removed his name from the credits entirely. This is when this began. He removed his name entirely, and they told the publisher that he wanted nothing to do with it. Then we come to the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. Sweet, merciful God. Right, where do we begin? I love the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. I understand that it's shite. I understand that it's not very good. And it's a terrible, fucking really, really bad adaptation of the comic. But I enjoy it because it has Sean Connery in it. Right? But this was 2003 when just we'll make a franchise out of anything energy in 2003. So they took Moore's clever, referential and richly layered Victorian literary mashup and turned it into a Sean Connery-led, incoherent action film that, to be fair, is mostly remembered for ending the career of Sean Connery. Connery was famously offered, I think he was offered The Matrix, and he turned it down because I don't understand a word of it. And then he turned down Gandalf famously because he read the Lord of the Rings script and again was like, I don't understand a word of it. And so he knocked it back, and these films became fucking iconic. So he was like, well, I clearly don't understand anything. And so he read The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen and had the same thought of like, well, I don't understand a word of it. It looks shite to me, but what do I know? And so he agreed to do it. He was like, well, clearly I don't understand Hollywood anymore, so I'll do this film. And it's shite. It butchers the characters. It scrapped entire plot lines, and it adds car chases through 19th century Venice, which is geographically, historically, and logically fucking mental. Anyway, Alan Moore was as were many audience members, but Moore especially was appalled. He not only disowned the movie, he became so disgusted with the movie that he swore off ever allowing his name to be associated with any adaptation of any of his work ever again. He said, and I quote, "It's imbecilic. It's for imbeciles." And he claimed that he was shocked by the incompetence. Shocked. Anyway, I'll stop doing it. But From Hell, actually, there's more From Hell. Johnny Depp. Right, Jack the Ripper. Moore's sprawling, dense Jack the Ripper story. It's massive. It's a huge comic book. It's really intricate. It's full of psychological depth, historical analysis, and occult symbolism and exploration. The movie is Johnny Depp being psychic and solving crimes with a passable English accent. Again, Moore fucking hated it. He said that it stripped all of the intellectual substance, which it does. I wholeheartedly agree. Again, I quite enjoy From Hell, it's fine, but I completely agree. It strips all of the substance and it turns it into like just a cheap murder mystery story. You can almost hear his beard twitching in frustration. Anyway, another movie that again I quite enjoy, but you really can't defend it when it comes to like an adaptation of the work, is Constantine. Keanu Reeves in 2005's Constantine. Now, this one's trickier. Constantine shows up in Swamp Thing, which was written by Alan Moore, and then he has his own line of comics, Hellblazer. Now, Alan Moore helped to co-create Constantine. The movie takes wild liberties with the character of Constantine. Keanu's Constantine is an American exorcist with slicked back hair and zero resemblance to the chain-smoking blonde-haired Bret that Moore had envisioned and had written. Moore distanced himself, as he always does, from the project. He criticised the film for having no grasp on what made the character interesting, which, again, it's an enjoyable film, but that character that he's playing is not Constantine. He's called Constantine, but he's not the Constantine that you read in Hellblazer. Anyway, by this point, Moore had developed a full-on policy of abstinence from Hollywood and the film industry in general. He would not accept money, royalties, or even acknowledge that these movies existed. He demanded that all of the royalties be redirected to the artists that he collaborated with. He gave scathing reviews. He called Hollywood, it's a destructive force. And he describes film adaptations as uncreative plagiarism. They steal them. And he compared the experience of watching his work once to, it's like watching your grandmother get mugged. It's a terrible impression of it. Like watching your grandmother get mugged. Anyway, his stance on this has never wavered. Even when adaptations like HBO's Watchmen series received critical acclaim for expanding and transforming the source material in intelligent ways, Moore, he just refused to engage with it. Damon Lindelof, the showrunner, he openly admits that he felt like he was violating Alan Moore's wishes, but he was able to justify it as an act of reverence. Moore's response? Moore did say that Lindelof sent him a letter, which he didn't finish reading, and he found the whole thing emotionally violent, and he didn't want anything to do with it. It was emotionally violent. The thing that Moore hates, it's not irrational per se, it's based on a deep philosophical difference about the nature of storytelling. Moore sees comics as a unique medium with its own language, rhythm, and capacity for meaning. When Hollywood tries to compress that into a 2-hour blockbuster and distill it, it inevitably flattens all of the complexity, it dilutes the themes, and it prioritizes spectacle over substance. That's primarily what the movies do. It's a sight to behold. He also, very understandably, hates the commodification of his work. He has rallied against DC Comics for years, particularly over Watchmen, the rights issues related to Watchmen. He believed he was promised the rights would revert back to him once the book had gone out of print, which, due to its perpetual popularity, that has never happened. So Moore considers the entire Watchmen IP to be a form of intellectual theft, basically. When DC launched a bunch of prequels and sequels, like Doomsday Clock and Before Watchmen, which I quite enjoy them, they're fine, but Moore described them as shameless, absolutely shameless. And what makes his disdain so potent is that it's not performative. He truly, deeply believes in the integrity of his work. He's not angry because he's difficult. He's angry because he's principled. And that's rare. Most creators cave in eventually. Most take the check at some point. We will talk about someone in the next one who does take the check. Moore tosses the check into a fire and then writes a 6,000 page grimoire about why he tossed the check into the fire. Moore is nothing if not consistent. He's been giving the same answers to the same questions in the same interviews for decades. When asked if he'd ever consider working with Hollywood again, he usually says something like, "I'd rather gnaw off my finger and feed it to a fox." He's not being dramatic when he says shit like this, he's being honest. He genuinely loathes what the film industry has done to his stories. And honestly, it's hard to blame him. There's something tragically poetic about Alan Moore's situation. He creates these brilliant, complex stories designed to challenge readers, and the world responds by just stripping them for parts and turning them into popcorn flicks. Do you know what I mean? It's like breaking up the roof of the Sistine Chapel and carving it out into jigsaw pieces for a jigsaw puzzle, and then putting those pieces in Happy Meals to be handed out to the public. Do you know what I mean? But anyway, Alan Moore, he doesn't want sympathy. He doesn't want anything. He just wants to be left alone to commune with the ancient gods of storytelling and write comics that nobody would dare fucking adapt. He went on a real kick of only writing stories that are unadaptable. Like, that you wouldn't fucking dare turn into a film. Anyway, if you want to explore some of them, be my guest. Lost Girls, if you want to check out it. Anyway, yeah, Alan Moore wants to be respected as a storyteller, not a rich author. If that means living out the rest of his life in a haze of righteous fury, then so be it. So the next time you see V for Vendetta mask on a t-shirt, or the next time someone misquotes Watchmen at you, spare a thought for Alan Moore. He's probably somewhere in Northampton writing a spell that will hex all of the Warner Brothers staff so that they never find peace in the... Anyway, good for him. I'll fucking love Alan Moore. He's my favourite author. Anyway, if Alan Moore is the angry wizard of comic books, then P.L. Travers is the stern, judgmental, emotionally repressed school mistress of children's literature. She wrote Mary Poppins, and her reaction to Disney's Mary Poppins makes Alan Moore look like a laid-back stoner dude. Makes Alan Moore look like the character Brad Pitt played in True Romance. Travers didn't merely dislike the 1964 adaptation of her book. She loathed it with the fury and fire of 1,000 burning umbrellas. Let's rewind. P.L. Travers published the first Mary Poppins novel in 1934. The book is weird. Not in a quirky and delightful way, but in a this feels like a fucking fever dream I had during a flu kind of way. Mary Poppins, in the original text, is pretty fucking strict. She's vain, and she's magical in a possibly sinister way. And she's kinda terrifying, to be honest. She's less Julie Andrews and more Victorian deity who will feed you to your own reflection if you forget your manners. But anyway, Walt Disney saw this and he thought, I can definitely put dancing penguins in this film somewhere and write music for this. And Travers said, no, absolutely fucking not will you put dancing penguin. And for about 20 years straight did she say this, absolutely fucking not will you write music for this. But Disney was nothing if not persistent, like a charming, ever-smiling lion circling a very grumpy British antelope. He waited for her, and eventually she relented. possibly due to financial pressure, possibly due to emotional fatigue, or maybe the mouse god just wore her down. She came up with some deal to the cursed mouse god. Anyway, she thought she had a lifeline, however. She was given script approval. Spoiler alert, she was given no such fucking thing, unbeknownst to her. But once Disney got the rights, he pretty much just tossed her out. He tossed her input out. He tossed it into the nearest trash can and proceeded to do what Disney always fucking does. Sprinkle it with musical numbers, some animation, and enough saccharine to just rot your teeth on sight. The result was a Technicolor spectacle that families all over the world adored. Travers, on the other hand, walked out of the premiere practically spitting teeth. She wept. She wept! Not from joy, not from, nostalgia, not from, the lost childhood, but from what one assumes was a deep, soul-shaking grief over the cinematic murder of her creation. One famous account has her walking up to Walt Disney after the screening and demanding the animated sequences be removed. He apparently replied to her, "Pamela, that ship has sailed." That was Walt Disney's way of telling her to fuck off. Basically, what enraged her so was how the movie fundamentally misunderstood what Mary Poppins was even about. Disney's version, it turned Mary into a chirpy, practically perfect in every way nanny with a twinkle in her eye. But in the books, Mary is practically perfect in the same way that your grandmother's scowl is. She is as perfect as a grandmother's scowl, which is intimidating, precise, and not to be fucking trifled with. Travers saw Mary Poppins as a complex mythological figure, a kinda like a magical guardian angel crossed with some sort of cosmic mystery, if that makes sense. She was influenced by Jung and Celtic lore and a whole bunch of spiritual theories. Disney, however, turned her vision into a smiling authority figure who sings with chimney sweeps. Do you know what I mean? To Travers, this wasn't just creative license, this was a character assassination. And then there were the penguins. Animated, dancing, singing penguins. British authors get really tied up about penguins. British people and penguins as I recall. Anyway, Travers hated the fucking penguins. She thought they were frivolous, ridiculous, and a complete betrayal of the tone of her story. Honestly, you haven't lived until you've read about a respected British author losing their fucking mind over penguins. It happens a lot. Let's not forget the music, the Sherman Brothers songs. Classics to be sure. But to Travers, they were treacly horror shows. She thought that the music had just dumbed down the story and turned what should have been subtle into a Broadway sing-along. Her vision had been transformed into something so unbearably American that she probably considered applying for cultural asylum or something like that. Do you know what I mean? The cherry, as is always the case, the cherry on this particularly bitter Sunday is that the world widely accepted the film version. They fucking loved it. Mary Poppins was a huge hit. It won 5 Oscars, I think 5 Academy Awards. Julie Andrews won Best Actress. Critics adored it. Kids sang the songs, parents bought the toys. It was a cultural phenomenon. Travers, meanwhile, was just sat there watching the monster she helped create devour her original story. Like a cheery musical Pac-Man. She went from the controlling matriarch of her own fictional universe to simply a footnote in Disney's corporate empire. And she never forgave them. In fact, she never allowed another adaptation while she was alive. There was a Mary Poppins stage musical that was proposed decades later, and she agreed, but only under the most aggressive conditions you've ever heard. the chief condition was that no one who worked on the Disney film, including the Sherman brothers, was allowed to come anywhere fucking near this musical, ever. Even in death, she tried to maintain control. Her will contained stipulations about who could adapt or work and how. She wasn't just trying to protect her story, she was trying to prevent another incident of joyful penguins, to be fair. You've got to admire the commitment to the bit. She was a tough old bird. Anyway, Disney eventually tried to soften its own narrative. Saving Mr. Banks, the 2013 film, it dramatised the making of Mary Poppins. Basically, Emma Thompson plays a slightly fictionalised, misunderstood Travers. Tom Hanks is Walt Disney. The film's thesis that Disney and Travers reached some kind of emotional understanding, that she came to terms with the adaptation and with Walt Disney. Yeah, that is Hollywood revisionism at its most fucking blatant. In reality, she hated Mary Poppins until the day she died. She was bitter, furious. She was so frothingly resentful that she spent decades warning people away from Disney like some kind of creative Cassandra. She wanted people to understand that the cheerful, magical nanny singing on rooftops was not her Mary, not my Mary, and she never, ever Walt Disney for what he did. What's almost tragic about the whole thing is that she wasn't wrong. She may have been grumpy and controlling, but she was also a very serious writer. She saw Mary Poppins as part of a larger mythological and spiritual canon. Disney saw it as a musical with merchandising potential. And the truth is, the movie did eclipse the book. Ask anyone today about Mary Poppins and they'll quote Julie Andrews. People don't even know what the original character was like. Do you know what I mean? Anyway, somewhere in the afterlife, P.L. Travers is probably walking around, shaking her head and muttering about those fucking penguins. If Anthony Burgess was reluctantly immortalised by a movie he hated, and Alan Moore performs necromantic rituals to avoid royalties, then Bret Easton Ellis is like their nihilistic younger cousin who saw the chaos coming and still couldn't stop it. He was there, man. He watched it happen. He helped it happen. And still, he was just confused by the whole thing. He wasn't angry like Moore. He wasn't betrayed like Travers. He wasn't anti-Semitic like Roald Dahl. Stop it, Jim. Stop it, Jim. He was just deeply, stylishly annoyed. When American Psycho hit the shelves in 1991, it caused a moral panic that made The Exorcist look like Bluey. People were horrified, not because they didn't get it, but because they did. Patrick Bateman, the book's protagonist, read yuppie demon in Armani. He was a walking, talking indictment of 1980s excess. He was also a sadist, and a murderer, and a cannibal, and possibly an unreliable narrator, depending on how you read the last 50 pages. But Ellis insisted that this novel was satire. Many critics insisted it was filth. The publisher insisted on publishing it. Naturally, Hollywood read it and thought, yeah, the kids are gonna love this. Get it made. Ellis, to his eternal credit, thought this was a terrible idea. Not in a keep your hands off my art Alan Moore sense, but in a this is going to be a fucking train wreck and I'm going to have to be associated with it and do press for it, aren't I? His main concern, the novel's entire engine, is Patrick Bateman's internal monologue. The narration isn't just a gimmick, it's the whole fucking novel. Bateman doesn't just kill people, he describes his skincare routine while he's doing it. The horror lives in that voice. If you lose that voice, you've got just another slasher film, but with better suits. And speaking of horror, the first serious studio pitch for the role of Patrick Bateman was Leonardo DiCaprio. Yes, if you think about the timeline, this is Titanic era Leo. Ellis's reaction to this was basically like a spit take. Like, what? DiCaprio was a teen idol. Ellis had just spent like 10 years trying to convince people that he was not, in fact, as psychopathic as the person he wrote. Casting Leo was like spray painting Patrick Bateman as my spirit animal on the poster. Even worse, Oliver Stone at one point was attached to direct it. You know, Oliver Stone, JFK, natural born killers, everything is a fucking conspiracy, Oliver Stone. He reportedly wanted to turn American Psycho into like a geopolitical thriller. Like, I'm being deadly serious here. In Ellis's own words, he said, "I don't even know what the script was. There were government agents, Bateman maybe worked for the CIA. At some point someone might have turned into a lizard. It was, in short, a catastrophe in waiting. Luckily, both Leonardo and Oliver Stone bailed, or were bailed. Enter Mary Harron, indie darling, and co-writer Guinevere Turner. Their vision? A black comedy. A satire. Cold, stylish Christian Bale. Yeah, they cast Christian Bale. He was relatively unknown Welsh guy who trained so hard for the role that he actually became American. Bale reportedly based the character on Tom Cruise, specifically Cruise's intense friendliness with nothing behind the eyes. If that's not method acting, I don't know what is. Ellis, predictably, was not impressed. He said that Christian Bale was too actor-y, which is both vague and incredibly accurate. He also worried that the satire wouldn't land properly, that the violence would be misunderstood, and that people would walk out the theatre thinking, yeah, those business cards were actually really nice. And honestly, he wasn't totally wrong. When American Psycho premiered in 2000, it was a Rorschach test. Critics didn't know what to do with it, neither did audiences. Some people saw a brilliant, scathing satire. Others saw a misogynistic slasher film. Some people thought Bateman was cool. Others also thought Bateman was cool, to be fair, but in a more troubling fanboy way, in a creepy way. Ellis's nightmare scenario had arrived. Years later, Ellis admitted the film was pretty good, which is Ellis speak for, yeah, fine, they didn't butcher it. He praised Bale's performance. He even acknowledged that the film had helped rescue the book from the bonfire of 90s moral outrage. People started to understand that it was a dark comedy, sort of. But here's the catch. You see, Bateman became popular. Not critically reappraised popular. Not reconnaissance popular. Not used in film school lectures popular. Meme popular. TikTok popular. Gym bros and Dubai guys quoting his morning routine popular. There are teenagers on the internet today who genuinely think that Patrick Bateman is an aspirational character, a sigma male. They wear American Psycho themed t-shirts and quote lines like, "I have to return some videotapes," with a wink. The irony is dead. We live in the age of Patrick Bateman core. And Ellis, he's somewhere between exacerbated and bemused. In interviews and on his podcast, he's talked about how surreal it is to watch Bateman become a meme, a fashion icon, a dating profile aesthetic. It's weird, he said, with the calm of a man who's been permanently emotionally detached since 1987. He never wanted Bateman to be cool. Bateman was a hollow man. He was a critique, an indictment. But in the age of image, in the age of social media, of Instagram-fueled nihilism, of course Patrick Bateman has been rebooted as an icon. Ellis, who built his entire career on ironic detachment, has now been trapped in a world that took his detachment literally. Not pleased, not disappointed, just fascinated in a very I can confirm that we are living in the dumbest possible timeline kind of way. It's also worth noting that Ellis has softened over the years. Not a lot, mind you, he's still cynical, difficult, Gen X literary brat, but he's more open about the film's success now. He admits that yes, it was well directed, that Christian Bale is really very good, and that something happened with the film, that it became culturally significant, even if that something is still being debated today. He's even joked about it. He said in an interview once, I still think the book is better, but I'm glad people finally got the joke. Eventually. Which, coming from Ellis, that's basically a standing ovation. But there's still a bitterness under the surface, because American Psycho the movie is now the default version in people's heads. Bateman is Bale. The axe scene is a punchline, hip to be square is a meme, and Ellis's bleak, satirical, postmodern horror novel is now merchandise. In the end, Ellis didn't hate the movie. He just hated what it became, or rather, what people did with it. The film wasn't a betrayal, it was just a gateway drug, and he saw it coming. A stylish, blood-soaked, Huey Lewis-themed gateway drug that made Bateman bigger than the story, bigger than the book, bigger than Ellis himself. And that's kind of the ultimate Bret Easton Ellis tragedy. He created a monster to critique a culture, and then the culture put it on a pedestal. Grim. Anyway, yeah, I'm done. That was a fucking long one.
Some cups. Why did you do this to me? Pop in the car. Get some cups. For what reason? What is the charge? Eating a meal? A succulent Chinese meal? Oh, that's a nice headlock, sir. Oh. Ah, yes. I see that you know your judo well. Good one. And you, sir, are you waiting to receive my limp penis? How dare get your hands off there.
No, we've only got one.
Ta-ta and farewell.
So I guess getting in the car.